great to be back. Oh my goodness. Most of you know I wasn't here last Shabbat. I was taking some time away to rest. I was calling it a micro sabbatical. It was an important reminder for me that taking time off, taking a moment to step away, allows us and is allowing me to come back with a different perspective. So on that note, I'm inspired to teach from a different perspective this morning. I want to look at our parasha, of course, but I especially want to focus on the message from our Haftarah. Our parasha this week, Korach, is notable in that it focuses really on just one topic, one thing, one incident. Most of our parshiot address several topics or even many topics, presenting several or many stories. But this week's Torah reading is really about just one thing, the rebellion of Korach and his followers against the leadership of Moses and against the guidance and instruction of God. As we look at this story, we can see this rebellion from two different angles, from two different perspectives. The first is the purely human realm. Korach is challenging Moses because Moses has so much power. Korach doesn't think it's right, fair, or appropriate for so much power to be concentrated in one leader and specifically concentrated in Moses. Now the second is the spiritual realm. In the narrative of our Torah, which illustrates that God has a role in how events unfold, Moses is the leader of the people because God empowered him. Moses serves at the pleasure of the Holy One, blessed be God. And as we remember, back in the narrative in Exodus, Moses didn't even want the job. In the spiritual realm, the root of Korach's rebellion is a rebellion against God, a rebellion against reality. The question this story raises for me as I study it this year is, what is leadership? And what should leadership be? Looking around our world at the events that unfold in the news, we're all aware that we need good leadership to thrive. And looking around at this community, I'm both proud and grateful for all who stepped up last week, to all who contributed to the leadership of our Shabbat services while I was away, to Mitch Gossett, David Schechter, and Eliza Wine for their roles on the Bima, but also to all who supported them as they took on this leadership, and also to all who I have had conversations with who are willing and interested in stepping up to lead next time. And in my time away, of course, I continued to reflect on what leadership means for me and what my leadership can mean and should mean for our Dat Shalom community. All this taken together has brought me to this week's Torah portion with a different perspective. And so I found myself drawn actually towards the Haftarah. So we're going to look at it a little bit more in detail. If you want to follow along with your eyes and not just your ears, you can open your Eitz Chaim Chumash and turn to page 876. So I've mentioned many times, you all know, we study our Haftarah weekly as a community on Thursday mornings. And I've mentioned perhaps once or twice that this in-depth weekly study of the Haftarah in Jewish tradition is not a particularly common practice of learning. We've been doing it here for a few months, going on a year now, but it's not something I've ever done before. And so I'm always finding myself learning something new. So when we look on page 876 in our Eitz Chaim Chumash, we see a page of commentary, and we see a section titled Relation of the Haftarah to the Parashah. We know that in theory, the content of the week's Haftarah is connected in some way to the week's Torah portion, and sometimes these connections are more straightforward than others. But this week, since Parashat Korach is really about just one topic, the connection to the Haftarah is quite clear. It's also about just one topic, and that topic is leadership, specifically in a time when leadership is challenged. In our parasha, Moses' leadership was challenged by Korach, and guided by God, Moses remained in his leadership role. Now in our Haftarah, Samuel's leadership is challenged by the people, and guided by God, Samuel steps down and helps the people inaugurate both a new leader and a new leadership structure. Our commentary points out that both Moses and Samuel appealed to God in the midst of their challenge, making it clear that their conduct has been proper and appropriate, that they have not engaged in wrongdoing, and thus that the challenge to their leadership is not about that. Our commentary reads, both leaders epitomize their rule in terms of justice and respect, specifically for the property of others. In other words, they did not lie, cheat, or steal. Their leadership is being challenged for other reasons. Our commentary concludes, the parasha and the Haftarah underscore their ideal common denominator, selfless service on behalf of justice, and a commitment to righteousness in societal affairs. So we have this ideal of leadership. I'm looking at this ideal of leadership as selfless service on behalf of justice. So now let's look more at the story of Samuel. As we see in our Chumash, we only have an excerpt from the Tanakh. We only have part of the story of Samuel appearing on Eitz Chaim. Our excerpt begins with first book of Samuel, chapter 11, verse 14, and continues until the middle of the next chapter, chapter 12. In order to really look at the story here in our Haftarah, we really do need another book, and that book is the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible. While our Chumash contains the complete text of all 5 books of Moses, it contains only selections from the prophets like Samuel, Isaiah, and so on. So if we want to learn the whole story presented in our Haftarah, we need to look at a Tanakh. Of course, we don't all have copies of the Tanakh in our sanctuary today, so as we move through the story, I'll guide us through it. The commentary on our Haftarah, page 876, explains for us that Samuel is the last leader in the line of Shoftim, of judges or chieftains, which was the leadership model for the Jewish people shortly after we first entered our promised land, the land of Israel. Our Haftarah begins near the end of chapter 11, but the story of the paradigm shift from Shoftim to Melachim, from judges to kings, appears earlier in chapter 8. In chapter 8, Samuel is beginning to grow old. He's working on a succession plan to appoint his sons as judges after him, and the plan, it's not working out. The elders of Israel assemble themselves and come to Samuel, and they say, "Your plan is not working. It is time for us to move to a new leadership model. All the other nations have kings instead of judges. So Samuel, find us a king." Samuel, in the words of the translation in our Tanakh, is displeased. Specifically, he is displeased that the elders of Israel want to be like the other nations, and want to be led by a king. After all, it is not the fate of our people to be like other nations. So Samuel prays to God, and God says to him, "Heed the demand of the people in all that they say to you. It is not you they have rejected, it is God they are rejecting as their king. Like everything else, says God, like everything else they've ever done since I brought them out of Egypt, forsaking me and worshiping other gods, they're doing that to you. Heed their demand, but warn them solemnly. Tell them what will happen to their community once a king is placed in charge." And that is exactly what Samuel does in the rest of chapter 8. He warns the elders of Israel solemnly. Having a king is not going to work out, and the people say, "No, we are not going to listen to you. We want a king so we can be like all the other nations." Samuel checks in with God, who again affirms that Samuel should heed the people. And Samuel says to the elders of Israel, "Okay, message received, you can all go home now." Then chapter 9, chapter 10, and most of chapter 11 tell the story of Samuel following God's guidance and to find and appoint a new king, and that new king is Saul. When we get to the end of chapter 11, the beginning of our Haftarah, we see the formal installation ceremony of Saul as king. And then we get to chapter 12, the grand finale of Samuel following the set of instructions that God has given him. He's completed the first part of the instruction. He has heeded the demand of the people and appointed for them a king. Now for the second and final part. Samuel must solemnly warn the people this new leadership model is not going to work out, and he does just that. That warning is the remainder of our Haftarah. So if we read ahead in the book of Samuel to the next chapter, chapter 13, verse 1, we see that Saul is only king for 2 years. And when we read ahead to chapter 15, we see the story of Saul's reign coming to an end. Now at this point, after the people have been on this 2-year adventure of trying things out with King Saul, Samuel the judge is still hard at work. Samuel, the same person who in our Haftarah inaugurates the monarchy with Saul as king, is still around and still in a position of responsibility when the plan fails. He helps the people pick up the pieces. Back to this teaching from our Haftarah commentary, that the ideal of leadership is selfless service on behalf of justice. I find myself very impressed and a little bit amazed by Samuel's ability to keep calm and follow God's instructions. When the people come to Samuel and ask for a king just like all the other nations have, Samuel sees right away this plan isn't a good one. And God agrees with him. God concurs that the people having a king is not a good plan. And God tells Samuel, move forward with it anyway. 2+ years and a whole lot of strife later, Samuel's right back where he started. I don't know about you, but I feel frustrated just thinking about putting myself in Samuel's shoes. But this is the task of leadership God puts before him. This is selfless service. Samuel is able to keep it in perspective, that it isn't all about him, that instead, leadership is about what the people want and what the people need. And in the narrative of our Haftarah, God affirms that this is okay. So I want to close our learning today with 2 blessings, one for our leaders and one for our community. For our leaders, for us on the Bima, for our staff, for our board, for our committees, I bless us all with the patience, calm, and insight to remember that an ideal of leadership is selfless service on behalf of justice. May we be inspired by Samuel to do the right thing, whatever our personal feelings might be about the details. And for our community, for all of us who are asking for leadership, I bless us with good communication. May we come to our leaders in ways that help and support them in seeing the need to step back and reflect, to consider different perspectives, and to consider spiritual perspectives. May we continue to choose leaders who come to their leadership from a place of service and to advance the cause of justice. Shabbat Shalom.